Yes. So, I'll give a short introduction about myself and also about the project and the research that I'm doing with Ecolab, so that you have a better idea, and then maybe you could do the same. So, my name is Virat Joshi. I'm originally from India, and I've lived actually about 10 years in the Netherlands, and I was doing my bachelor's there. Uh, then I also worked in Netherlands for about almost 5 years, and then I decided to quit my job and do a master's, and hence I decided to study procurement and supply chain, and I was studying that at Cranfield University in England. So as part of my thesis, or as part of my studies, I have to write a thesis, and Ecolab was kind enough to offer not just for me, but six projects in total uh, for our university, for our students. And my project is one of the six or seven, I believe. And my project is looking into the procurement function here in Barcelona, and to see if it can be more agile. So my supervisor, let's say you could say that is Frederick Wallen over here, the raw material sourcing director, and then he has given me, or for the project, he's given me a short background, what he intends to do for me, like the research. So he basically, this organization over here is quite new. I believe they started the centralized procurement function in Barcelona about 3 years ago, in 2014 or maybe 15. So it's still quite, growing. It's developing, and Frederick wanted to see how we can further mature the organization. What are some of the aspects which aren't working well today, and if we can bring, how can we bring agility to it? So how can we be faster in a way, so that we can capitalize on the opportunities, especially when the market is becoming more and more volatile. Let's say it's more and more changing quite rapidly. So how do we, or how does the procurement function over here adapt to these changes, and also take advantage of these changes, and gain like a competitive advantage? So that's a bit of the background about the project. So my the goal is essentially to identify agile procurement options over here. So looking at the processes, ways of working, the organization itself as well. Try to identify where are the gaps, what's lacking, and then related to the theory. So what is agility? What is agile procurement? How do other companies, let's say, have a more agile way of working? What is the benchmark, for instance? And then compare the Ecolab's procurement organization and its function with those standards set by, let's say, by the theory, and also by other companies. So what are the best practices? So as part of that, I am currently in Barcelona, visiting their offices here and conducting this, like these kind of discussions, these kind of interviews with not just the procurement team, but also with other stakeholders who also interact with the procurement function, such as quality, R&D, and so on. As part of the research as well, I this the questionnaire, I just saw that you sent it to me. So the questionnaire was meant to get an initial insight into the organization and into the perception of the people. So what do people think about the procurement function of Ecolab in Barcelona? What's like people's understanding of agility, and how do they perceive, like view the organization from their mind? How do they see the organization? If it's agile enough, and that all comes in handy while recommending something, because, for instance, I get to compare what people see or perceive regarding agility and procurement at Ecolab. What then by doing this kind of discussion, this interview, then I get to have more information, and then also by comparing it with theory, then I have three sets of separate data. So then I can compare. For instance, in some cases, people think that certain aspects of their organization is doing pretty well. So let's say spend visibility, but then by doing these kind of interviews. For instance, I come to know that there is spend visibility, but it takes a lot of time. There are resources which are dedicated to do these kind of analysis. There are issues with the data, the different systems and getting the data, for instance. And then what does the theory say? So people would have maybe a good perception of visibility, but in reality, it just is not working. They can see the results, but then the way they get the results maybe is not as visible or it's not as agile. And then what is the theory behind it, and how can we improve that kind of process, for instance? So that's So that's the background about the research and also my way of let's say approaching this project.
Yeah, perfect. Makes absolute sense. And yeah, when I was asked to participate in the questionnaire and in this program, I was quite curious. But okay, let me start with myself. So my name is Oliver Hilpert. I am with Ecolab now for 19 years.
Okay.
My original background is not from procurement. I'm coming from a travel agency. Worked for quite a long time, for more than 10 years, in a department that was called Travel and Fleet Management in Germany,
Right.
which was mainly taking care of the operational part of the fleet, having the fleet running in Germany with over 600 cars, plus handling all of the travel expense reports that were coming in.
Right.
When we went through some, let's say, outsourcing, so we have outsourced, or you might know that, our accounting to India, our expense management to Poland.
Right.
And about 6 years ago, when we had the merge with Melco, we started to create in Ecolab this indirect procurement organization. This was not there before, so we haven't had a indirect procurement organization on European level in Ecolab before. It was all organized locally.
Right.
And since 6 years now, we have this organization. We are divided in categories, and within the categories in groups. I am part of the group 3, which is travel and fleet management. I'm mainly taking care about travel, but also about fleet with my colleague Herbert Hamrecht.
Right.
And I will be, let's say, jumping more into the fleet topic again later this year, as my colleague will be retiring, and I will take over his tasks.
Right.
And yeah, in terms of the procurement agility, when this came up, for me actually, to be very open, it was the first time I heard about this. Okay, agility. We have never talked about agility in procurement in Ecolab.
Right.
So let's learn more about that and understand what this means. So in the meanwhile, yeah, I've got a little bit of feeling on it, using your questionnaire and also making some Google research. But interestingly is that you're running a project on agility, but nobody has ever talked about agility in procurement in Ecolab.
Right.
Although I think we are doing a lot of things that are in favor or that are supporting agility and bringing agility to procurement.
Right.
We've never have been focusing on this, but I understand out of your project that this is something that Fred is going to develop together with you, and will be, let's say, focused for future, let's say, changes.
Yeah. Or let's say changes in a positive way. So let's say make it a bit more mature. Let's say, hopefully, if I do a good job. Yeah. All right. One question regarding your function. So you mentioned like the travel and fleet management. Is it do you manage the entire European region, or it's the entire Europe, Middle East, Africa region?
So the title that I have is Europe, Middle East, Africa, and I'm partly handling Middle East and Africa as well. But we have also one person that is in charge of indirect procurement, all of the categories in Middle East, Africa, which is supporting me.
Right, right. And my other question was, so within the indirect procurement category, you mentioned that you are in Group 3. So Group 3 is travel and fleet management. Could you also maybe,
Correct.
okay, yeah, and could you also tell me which are the other ones? I know there is something called, because I spoke to Manuel,
Manuel Kiki.
yeah. So he's doing
Yeah. So
facility.
we have four groups. Group one is so maybe where we are. The aim is to have a team of three. Mainly, there's a procurement manager, a senior procurement manager, a procurement representative, and then somebody from analytics.
Right.
We're not yet there. In Group 1, they are taking care of the categories professional services, human resources, consulting, and as well as IT and telecommunication.
Right.
The Group 2 is Manuele, which you talked with Francesco. This is facilities and manufacturing.
Right.
Then we have Group 3 is travel and fleet, and Group 4 is logistics with Anais and Erin, and you might have met with them.
Yeah. All right. All right. And Frederick still has to send me the data, but do you know what in total the indirect procurement spend is?
I know for our group, for my group, but I cannot. I would need to look for the total number of indirect procurement. I don't know at the moment.
All right, no, then I can just.
So for our group, travel and fleet is $90 million in Europe, divided in 60 million for fleet and 30 million for travel.
Okay, all right. All right. So my next, before I explain, let's say, agility, I just would like to, like you mentioned that you did some research. So how do you see the definition of agile or agility in procurement?
Well, let's say that before starting any research, I had my opinion that I said, okay, we have, let's say, fast. If you're looking at how the world is developing, everything is getting faster. So agility for me, or especially in procurement, is when the markets are changing rapidly, trends are coming up. We need to have a way of working that supports us jumping on changes more rapidly, faster, and agile compared to what we did maybe in the past. So it's, for me, it's a necessity to adapt to a trend that we have overall in the world. Everything is going faster. So if you start researching in Google, the first thing you will find most probably is digitalization.
Right.
So how can IT solutions, data, digitalization support as well, because it's there. And again, I come back to the point that there is a necessity to be able to adapt to this, because others will do it. If we're not doing, we are getting in a competitive disadvantage.
Yeah.
But at the same, that's more, and at the same time, it's how we, and this is what you explained also. It's how are we organized internally? How are we working internally? And is the structure that we have supporting agility or not?
Yeah.
And interestingly, we have procedures like the TDC waves. You might have heard a lot about TDC, how we, let's say, conduct RFPs, what kind of, let's say, analysis we do in advance. And this takes a long time, which to me often is too long, because we are losing time. This is something the organization, I think, has recognized in the last year, so they have made TDC easier. So there is a trend to make things easier and also faster.
Yeah.
But yeah, the overall structure, how is Ecolab structured, what kind of skills we have, how do we support our own people in being how would I say, being prepared
Right.
for being more agile. This is also something that Ecolab, I think, has started to do, but we need to further strengthen this.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. What you mentioned, I mean, that's pretty much true. Like, so you have the right idea. If you look at theory about agility, based on the research, I've in my opinion, like I've concluded in four different key areas or four pillars of agility. So the first one is anticipating change. So being ahead of the curve, let's say. So let's say the market trends. So you adapt, not only adapt, but then you see something coming, and then you adapt your processes and systems accordingly before it might disrupt the supply chain or the company. So that's the first pillar.
You're
Then
right. We often are reactive and not proactive.
yeah, yeah. So that's the first pillar of agility, being proactive. So having kind of processes, tools in place, also the right set of skills and competences to identify these kind of trends. The second pillar is then managing risks and uncertainty. So, do you have processes in place? If something happens, then do you have processes in place to ensure that there is a minimum disruption, or you can react quickly and not take too much time, essentially. So that's the second, let's say, pillar. Then the third pillar is the time aspect. So how quickly are you reacting to something? And it's over here. It's not just about how quickly you react, but the difference between, let's say, a company which is able to successfully manage a disruption is not only looking at changing faster, but also changing or responding quickly and efficiently. So it's not just about reacting quickly; it's reacting how you react. You minimize the cost in the way you react while not compromising on speed, and also doing it more efficiently. So that's like the third aspect, and then the last one is about uh, within the organization. How is the cross functionality of the organization to support in quick decision making, to be proactive. So the last aspect is about cross functionality, which essentially supports the other three pillars. So do we do procurement and marketing, for instance, have a good collaboration, so that the sales data and then the sales trends that the marketing team sees is then also shared with procurement, so that they can foresee that if they have to, let's say, purchase additional capacity, or if they have to identify new suppliers, for instance. Similarly, with how is the collaboration with R&D in the product design. So that procurement has also a say in the let's say the formula or the components that make the raw material, so that they know that, okay, we can minimize the chances of only relying on one supplier, for instance. Then we have options, and we can also get better prices. So integrating those kind of aspects of procurement in R&D. So those are the cross functionality aspects as the last pillar of agility.
Yeah, makes sense.
So yeah, I mean, you explained your function, your department's function. So you also mentioned that basically it's travel and fleet management. So can you explain a bit more about your supply base? How is the RFQ process done as well?
Yes, we are in travel. Let's start with travel. We are quite major, let's say it that way. We have assigned one travel agency that is working with us in entire Europe. It's actually a global contract that is getting implemented in the other regions now. And in Europe, we're already done. We have already implemented 22 countries. So it's one big supplier, if you want to. Also, the way we are paying the supplier is quite easy. We have mostly 90% of the travelers have a Citibank card, so and they are expensing their costs through Concur Travel and Expense, which gives us a quite good visibility in terms of the spend and the data.
Right.
In terms of the other suppliers like airlines, we are already conducting global RFPs together with the other regional teams in the US, with bigger airlines like United and Delta and their code-share partners. In terms of hotels, it's the same. We're using one platform from HRS to conduct the RFPs together in one global RFP. Rental car is a little bit regionalized due to the specifics from the supplier base we have here. This is regional. This is done by myself here in Europe.
Right.
And also the local deals that we have with smaller hotels or train rail companies, these are handled here.
Right.
For fleet, it's similar. We have a global contract with one big supplier, which is LeasePlan. We have agreed on sole supply for the next for 4 years, so it's a 5 years contract. 1 year ago was signed, and we're mainly streamlining all to this supplier, and also trying to use as much services from the supplier as we can to have everything in one hand. An example, they will be not only providing the financial lease, also maintenance, tires. They are providing the fuel cards, the insurance in most of the countries. So it's quite, let's say, also travel and fleet is quite mature and not so structured, not so localized like other categories maybe.
Right. And the contracts are also then long-term contracts. So you mentioned 5 years for the fleet contract that you have.
Yes.
Right.
It's the same for the CWT contract. Customer Leads the travel agency. It's also a 5 years contract.
Right. And so you said that like every or let's say the strive is to have global kind of contracts. Was this always the case, or was this let's say recently that this direction was taken to have more and more kind of consolidated procurement where you narrow down the supply base and you have one kind of big supplier so that it leverages your buying power as well, and then also for the supplier it's attractive to get a bigger business?
No, this has not been the case in the past. So, as said, let's say 6 years ago, when I started in the indirect procurement organization in Europe, there was no organization in place, and so you can imagine that most of the contracts were local. So, if you're looking at the travel agency, I started with, I think, 16 different travel agencies in 22 countries. And not even in one country we had the same agency for the legacy Equalab and legacy Nalco, so it could happen that you had two different agencies in one country. So This was very local. We started to build travel. I think was one of the first categories that started with having global calls on quarterly basis, trying to, let's say, leverage best practices and put volumes together to start digging into more global RFPs, which of course results in a much bigger buying power.
Yeah.
And also one of the key aspects which we are focusing in the last years is more and more is one thing is globalization, and the other thing is choosing providers that we can partner with. That's why we're also looking for, let's say, long-term contract and not only 1 year, etc. Because you can always change after 1 year, but you have this pain of change, and we're trying more to find suppliers that are able to, let's say, work in changes. So if the environment is changing, if the industry is changing, we want this supplier to change with us rather than having the need to look for another supplier that is more... so let's say that way, the agility that we're talking about is something we expect from the suppliers as well when partnering to them.
Yeah.
So, and I don't think we have finalized the path of globalization here, but and especially in some areas we will never do it full. If you take rental car, the U.S. is working very successfully with national rental car, which is not very major in terms of the organization here in Europe. So there will always be some changes, some differences. But in the last 2 years, let's say it that way, we have become more and more global, working on global activities, signing global contracts, etc.
Yeah. All right. So, as you said that the strive is to have more global, but then sometimes it's not possible. Like for instance, in the US. So, how do is the strategy to always give the business across different regions, or the RFQ is global, but it is possible to have local contracts. So, for instance, you have an RFQ for, as an example, for Europe, let's say, and there are 3 suppliers, and you identify that none of the 3 have good European coverage. They do have a coverage, let's say. Some are better in some regions, in some countries than the others. Would you then split that RFQ and award the contract to the one which is best fits in terms of the coverage and capabilities, even though it's a European contract, or would you still go for a European contract despite maybe knowing that in a particular country their capability is not as good, for instance?
Well, it's a good question, but a difficult question at the same way, because you need to somehow balance it. The target is always to, let's say, have an harmonized process and supplier across one region. So, if possible globally, if not possible across one region. And the balance you need to take in the example you are showing is, okay, how important, or what is the benefit of having a unified process, and is this maybe weighted in a higher way than having a smaller country that might not have the full, let's say, coverage there. But if the coverage is something that is, and we're talking to the business as well, right? And if the weight of the coverage is higher than having a harmonized process, we would go and split it and, let's say, make an exceptional contract for an exceptional contract for a specific part of the region,
right,
if needed.
Right. And with regards to the communication between let's say different stakeholders to have this kind of global way of working, choosing a global contract or global supplier rather, and you mentioned that you also had talks quarterly. So is this then? So can I assume that you have kind of a governance structure in place to talk to procurement managers in your category with the different regions to support in this global management of a supplier and so on. So is that governance in place?
It depends on how you want to define governance. If you define governance in a way that we are working together and in that team, so we have for each region, and we have 4 regions, we have a procurement manager that is leading the category. We are having these quarterly calls, and we are, let's say, aligning on how to structure an RFQ, and then we are deciding jointly together who of us in a region would be, let's say, taking a little bit the lead on sourcing activities. Sometimes we start with a global RFP, but we are still, let's say, regionally responsible to approve or not approve. I'm thinking here about the hotels as an example. So nobody in the U.S. will decide whether I take this hotel into the program or not. This will be me. Neither I would decide for South America, etc., etc. So if you define governance in that way, yes, this is in place. If you define governance in a way that you have somebody that has a global head and is, let's say, defining the strategy and the rest of the region are following him, this is not the case.
Right.
So governance in terms of, if you define governance at the same level, it's in place. If you define governance in a way top down, it's not in place, and I would not be in favor of having that in place.
Right. So essentially, like then
this is let's say that way. It was a bit different in the past. So we're a U.S.-based company, the headquarters in the U.S., and as per definition, if you're working in the U.S., you're global. That's funny. So whenever, so if I am indirect procurement manager EMEA, because I'm sitting here in the region, if I would be sitting in the U.S., it would not be indirect procurement manager U.S., I would be indirect procurement manager global.
All right.
Even though I have no say, let's say it that way, no governance in terms of forcing other regions to do something.
Yeah.
In the past, let's talk about, 5-6 years ago, we had the experience that, especially in the U.S., they were saying, okay, this is the way we are going here, and this is working. If it's working in the U.S., it will be working everywhere.
Right.
But this is, in the last years, this has changed more to a, let's say, horizontal working together rather than a vertical top-down.
Right. And in the RFQ process, for instance, the global contract that you have for the travel agency,
yes.
So it is a global RFQ, and as part of that RFQ, then would you sit together with your colleagues in the different regions to develop a strategy, to develop to work together towards within the RFQ process, and then have a kind of also a decision on or discussion on the decisions that are taken in the awarding as well. Was that the case?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's the case. So, as said, we're always defining one person which maybe has the most experience or the best connection to the supplier base, etc. That would be somehow leading a little bit the activity. Yeah. But then we have our regular meetings where we're saying, okay, this is what we have achieved, this is what we can do, and then we're coming up with, let's say, combined, a joint recommendation to the management. At the end of the day, the decision is in most of the cases not taken by procurement itself. We are recommending to the business, and the business is saying, okay, we want to go that way, we follow you, and the final decision is then taken by the management.
Right. And do you also is there a governance, or let's say some kind of a model where you interact with the procurement managers or other categories to identify issues in your category, or to share best practices or solutions, for instance?
No.
Yeah.
This is not yet in place. So what we are doing on regular basis within the indirect procurement team is, of course, we're having our team meetings, and any of us is presenting current projects, what we are doing, etc. Mm-hmm. And we are using this occasion to also provide feedback if we have thoughts, ideas, but I would not say that we have currently a proactive program where we are sharing within different categories.
Right. Because I see this as an opportunity. Like, for instance, from the way you described your approach and the strategy in the last few years, it's quite, in a way, mature way of working, and having global contracts also leverages, the purchasing power, and then it's win-win for both. Ecolab as a customer and then a supplier as well. So, but then I do not see this in other categories, for instance. So for instance, if you look at raw materials, they are quite regional, even though the suppliers are global. And in some cases, it's the case where the supplier knows Ecolab more than Ecolab does itself, because the supplier is working with Ecolab globally, so they know the kind of demands and requirements they receive from, let's say, the US team or the European team or Asia team. But then, because Ecolab within the raw materials procurement team do not interact that much with each other, they themselves do not have the visibility globally within their own kind of category. So that's something, I guess, could be improved. And one way of I thought that as a solution or as a proposal would be that, once in a while have meetings across categories to understand, how they approach the challenges and the issues they face, and the kind of thought process and decision making that goes into the building the strategy that they do.
Yeah, correct. It makes absolute sense. Yeah, I agree.
All right. Let me see if I had other questions. Yeah. So because now you have, let's say, global contracts, or you strive to have global contracts, that also means, you are more reliant on your supplier. So as part of this, let's say, strategy, usually companies are also open to more risks. If something goes wrong with the supplier, in this case, let's say, as an example, their financial situation is not that great. It could have an impact on the supply base. Sorry, not the supply base, but on you as a receiver of a services they are providing. So how do you kind of manage these kind of risks to ensure that, okay, going with one supplier, you have to have maybe a bit more thorough checks on their, not them as their service and their capabilities, but also them as an organization, and their financial statements and their overall performance of the company, for instance.
Yeah, that's a good question. This is also something that came up in I would say in the last 12 months. In the past, we did not focus much on that, but especially for the bigger suppliers, we are now, before taking the final decision, we're going to finance, we're going to accounting, and asking them to check the financial background of the supplier before awarding them. To make sure that, at least from a financial standpoint, the risk is minimized. Let's say it that way.
Yeah.
And in addition, if we see that there could be a potential risk, we are trying to make the contract in a way that give us some flexibility in case in case something happens there. Right.
Right. Can you give me an example of how you create like this flexibility within the contract?
Yes, let's take an example. We're currently trying to find a supplier which provides us an IT solution to handle the fleet all over Europe. So currently we have LeasePlan as a provider, which is the supplier providing the financial lease, Hilpert, etc.
Yeah.
But we don't have a program across all the countries where we can press a button and say, okay, we have 25 Volkswagen Passat with 2-liter engine, blah, blah, blah. So this is not yet there. So every operational organization within Ecolab, and the operational part is not handled by procurement, it's handled by RES management, the real estate and service and support structure. And they need a IT tool that is that would be, let's say, harmonizing the fleet in one tool, so that we have always full visibility on the fleet on the road. Also using them to check invoices, etc. And we have two companies awarded, so we check the financial background. For one is quite good, the other one is let's say so-so.
Yeah.
And we are incorporating in the contract then that we have kind of backup. So in case we will be given. So it's a cloud-based solution, but we will have, let's say, hard copies of our data every month. So in case this company is bought from another company or they get financially disrupted, as an example, we would still have our data that we can use. Even if the program would not be there, we have the data, and we could use that to find another supplier that just needs to take our data, incorporate it, and then we would be there. That's one of the recent examples.
Right. All right. And this way, let's say, yeah, it does, yeah. And then the way that you approach, let's say, for like you said that you did go to accounting to check the financial performance of the supplier, the background of the supplier. Is this also like because of like the brainstorming sessions and talking to different people within the team and coming up with this idea, or was it because I'm trying to identify if what you did with going to accounting, that's a proactive step on your and not like it's a process.
No, to be very open and honest, it was not a proactive step. It was let's say, a need that came up in the past, where especially management before, or the key stakeholders that needed to take the decision said, okay, we are fine, we're going ahead, we understand that your supplier is covering that, and we understand that it's the best fit, etc. But what do we do in terms of risk mitigation? Have we checked the financial background? So it was more...
Right.
In this case, a reaction, because we haven't thought about it in the past.
Right.
But yeah, of course, this is something that for the future now we learn and said, okay, this is something we need to apply for the future as well.
Right.
Then we'll be much more proactive. But in this case, it was not proactive; it was a demand.
Right. And then this is a good, let's say, solution, and a good idea to check the financial performance, especially if you're awarding a big contract. Such kind of ideas, will they be then put into the TDC process? Because I don't know if this is like as part of the process currently.
I don't think this is part of the process yet. We have this spend analysis, we have the supplier analysis, we are waiting the suppliers, but I don't think this is part yet of the TDC process, especially checking the financial background and risk mitigation. This would be an opportunity.
Yeah. All right. And also now with having a global contract, do you also have built some kind of a framework to manage the relationship? Because it's not just now, like a transactional relationship. You're just buying a service and you're monitoring the performance of the service, but also it's because it's more of a global partnership, as you said. Do you also manage this relationship differently now?
Yes. So two different components we have here. If I'm looking at the travel agency, what we have done is we have put clear SLAs in place, and we have clear KPIs to, let's say, monitor the SLAs, and we have also put in place penalties if the SLAs are not, if the KPIs are not performing in the way they should be performing. We're measuring this on monthly basis and taking action on that. We have a structure in place where I said we were talking on global level every 4 months.
Yeah.
Just more to share how it's working in the region, and if there is something, let's say, cooking, of course, more often, but usually it's every 3 months.
Yeah.
But also in our own organization, let's say in Europe, I'm taking care of Europe. I have a European counterpart at the supplier base that I'm talking every week with, and we're going through all the open topics, all things that are working good, not good.
Yeah.
And I have assigned people that are helping me in the country. They are not from procurement, but they're providing me the feedback I need. And the same is CWT, so the supplier has local responsible people that are dealing with the country.
Yeah.
So this is in place. A little bit differently, we are doing it for fleets with the big lease plan contract. What we have done instead is, because we need to involve 3 parties.
Yeah.
So we don't know. It's for CWT. It's for the travel agency. It's us. It's procurement and the supplier.
Right.
For fleet, it's procurement, it's the supplier, and it's the real estate organization, the RES organization, because they are handling the operational part, which adds a little bit of complexity. And this is something that is currently being developed. So in the past, procurement and RES has been working in silos. So we did the contract, and then we went with the contract to the operational guys and said, okay, this is the contract, now you can implement.
Yeah.
And we're facing a lot of issues there. So what we've established now, we have one person, it's called the European Fleet Manager, is belonging to the RES organization, but is kind of building the bridge in between procurement and the own RES organization to make sure we understand from procurement side also the local needs of the operational guys in the countries, and the other way around, so that also the RES people understand how we are supplying things, how we are conducting an RFQ, why we're taking a decision. So this is a new structure, and what we're doing is on a weekly basis. We are talking on, let's say, we have an operational call with the supplier, with the European Fleet Manager, and with procurement.
Right.
And every 4 weeks we have a kind of steering committee meeting where we are adding through to this call one level. So the director of RES is there, the director of indirect procurement is there, and the director from the supplier is there.
Yeah.
Just kind of as an escalation path on one side, and also keeping, let's say, the management informed on what is going on, if there is an escalation from their side needed, etc. But this is something we're currently building. This is quite new also.
Right. And then if you will make this kind of a framework for future contracts under fleet management then as well.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. All right. Okay, so moving on, like I would like to know, like, if you see some kind of challenges in your area in procurement, which maybe can be solved by bringing some agility into it.
The one challenge that we're currently having is that we are working remote. So we are not, as you see, I'm working in Germany. I'm not in the COE in Barcelona. And I'm pretty sure we will not have 100% of procurement responsible sitting in Barcelona in the future. So there's always kind of the challenge to work remote. There's one thing. The biggest hurdle, I think, or challenge I see is that even if we are quite proactive in procurement, I fear a little bit that the business is not as proactive as we are. So, and as we are depending mainly on the business, they are our stakeholders, they are main decision makers. The challenge I see here is that the business needs to become more agile as well, right?
Right. So can you give me an example?
Yeah, let's take this IT solution. So from procurement side, we are ready since 4 weeks, but the management has not yet taken the decision because they are coming back and say, okay, we want to have an additional proof of concept, we want to have an additional DZ, whatever. So are delaying the process somehow. This is one example.
Right.
Also, I don't know. Let's give you an example. We're currently conducting an own study internally on alternative powertrains for vehicles. So you might have heard that in many of the European countries we have the diesel discussion. Our fleet is mainly 100% of diesel.
Yeah.
So we need to think about the future. If it makes sense to change to petrol, if it makes sense to change to CNG gas or even to electric vehicles. But this would also then, let's say, even if we come up with a strategy that makes absolute sense to, in an interim until, let's say, the e-vehicles are more major in terms of range also, to go for a CNG vehicle, this would be, we would need the business to support this because it's also a change. If I'm a territory manager outside going in the field, going to the customer, I need to change my habits in terms of how to fuel the car because I cannot use every petrol station I'm using today.
Yeah.
And here the risk I see is that, this is just an example, that the business will be more, okay, let's prefer to spend a little bit more, but then not disrupt the sales process, even though it's not a disruption from the sales process, it's just a change of habits, right?
Yeah. So in such a scenario, let's say, also when you're coming up with the KPIs and the SLAs, do you involve the operations team because they are the people who will, let's say, are going to use the service? So do you also take into account their feedback as well?
Yes. So what we have done is we have defined one, let's say, European master for SLAs and KPIs, which, for the SLAs, what we wanted to measure, we did not put any KPIs, and then in there at that stage we said, okay, these are the things we want to measure, and then we gave that to the countries. I said, okay, you will be working with your local representative from the supplier to establish, using these rules, but establishing the KPIs so that we could take into consideration their feedback. And also what we did, so this was the first step, and the second step, we identified additional services that we wanted to buy from this supplier that were not correct or were not specified, let's say, that way in the former SLA. So we went back to the country, we said, okay, what kind of services do you want to have additionally, and what kind of KPIs should we attach to that?
Yeah.
And then we went back to the supplier and said, okay, now we need to reopen our SLA and add some additional KPIs.
Yeah. And in this example, was it also, is this a process in the TDC, or this is also something that, from your experience and from, I guess...
No, this was not in the TDC. No. This is something we've done, and it's kind of an evolution, let's say, of this new way of working together, building, stepping out of the two silos and building the bridge between procurement and the operational guys.
Right. Okay. So now, because of this experience, you will also now involve them earlier in the process in the future.
Yes. So what we have done is we have put in place a governance model where we have clearly defined the roles and responsibilities and the way of interacting with each other and who will do what. So this will help a lot.
Okay. Um,
Just one comment that I don't want to be impolite, but in 2 minutes I need to go to another call. Are we fine so far, or should we schedule another call to finalize the discussion?
yeah, I would prefer actually maybe half an hour, maybe, but it doesn't need to be today. I mean, next week or the week after is also fine. I can send an email later on asking your
Yes, of
availability,
course.
and yeah, all right. So we can do that. It's fine.
Yeah, just let me have a look. So, in example, next week, Tuesday at the same time as today we can do, or on Wednesday at no Wednesday it's not so good. Thursday I can do at 4 p.m.
Okay.
So just pick one of that. And Thursday 4 p.m. or Tuesday 9 p.m. would work for me, or Friday also 9 p.m. would work.
9
So
a.m. you
just
mean,
send me
right?
an invitation and sorry.
9 a.m. right, not p.m. I guess.
Pardon. Right. No, otherwise would be quite late. 9
Yeah.
a.m. Yes.
All right. So yeah, I think I'll just have to check because I just want to double check with the time differences because I'll be in the UK. But Tuesday seems fine. But I'm just going to double check and then email you in a couple of hours.
Okay, so then thank you very much. Have a great rest of the day. It was quite interesting. I'm looking forward to talk to you next week to finalize the conversation. And yeah, have a great weekend and a safe trip home.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks again, and thanks for the discussion and the open and frank comments that you shared, and I also wish you a good
Absolutely.
week. Yeah. All right.
Thank you so much. Okay, take care.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.